All the incidents shared are based on truth, so you might want to crawl back into safety. The Flying Dutchman. The night was dark, as pitch and as cold as ice. Through the stormy sea, off the coast of Cape Town, sailed the HMS Resolute, her timbers creaking under the weight of the stormy waters. My crew gathered on the deck and slightly looked at the sea, at the horizon where lightning had cut through the black clouds, as though with a glittering sword. They call it the silence before the storm. I am Captain Jonathan Harper, and as I looked into the fading lines of light, my heart raced with intensity. I had listened to the stories somehow everyone had, but those were only tales which sailors told each other to spook themselves and have something to do. But long-standing anxiety remained with me, an innate signal that everything was not all right. The human sense was a strange matter to look deep into the unknown. "Stay alert, boys," I shouted, fearing that my words might get silenced by the howl of the wind and the crashing sounds of the waves. Just at that moment, as if by script, a brilliant lightning tore through the black night, and there, floating over dark waters, was the apparition of a vessel surrounded by an electric green aura, the Flying Dutchman. I froze, my pulse racing, and my heart beating so fast. Seaman O'Malley, my right in command, drew in his breath sharply. "God save us," he muttered. Although the spectral ship itself seemed to be floating through the storm, it was shrouded with masts by a fog-like material. This one was already scaring me, and I saw it sailing towards us, the silhouettes of the cursed crew members visible on the deck, their empty, glassy stares directed at me. "Hard to port!" I exclaimed, wanting to turn the Resolute to the left to escape the ship that brought the curse. But there was no movement. The helm was firmly stuck, like the ship was destined to follow this course no matter what. The crew hurried, fear gripping them as the Flying Dutchman approached. This tension filled up the Resolute, an oppressive feeling that the end was near. I tightened my hand around the railing and stared intently at the spectral figure of the Dutchman's captain. The captain's lips formed the words, but they were lost in the wind. At that moment, there was a most awful feeling as the two vessels came into contact and hit each other. The Resolute shook and buckled, and I was flung across the deck. Darkness enveloped me. When I opened my eyes, the storm had passed. The sea was perfectly still, and the sky was an ugly shade of gray. The Flying Dutchman was no longer there. It was as if it had never existed in the first place. I forced myself up from the floor, my head pounding. The deck was empty. The crew was not in sight. "Hello?" I whispered, calling out in a broken voice. Silence answered me. This is when I was falling toward the helm to take the wheel and saw that it was still stuck. As soon as I saw it, there was an occurrence of either the feeling of fear running down my spinal cord, or it may be my thought process in a particular scene in a movie. In looking at the horizon, I saw a green glow. Before I could move, I saw the familiar fog of Resolute coming into sight. Stunned, I rushed to get the wheel moving, but it was stuck. Standing, I saw my crew looking at the ship in fear. The fact that over time I ended up realizing that I and my crew were fated to remain bound to the vessel. I was stuck in the curse. Soon the green mist emerged around the ship, and with a heavy breath, I thought to myself, I cannot leave the ship now. As I shut my eyes, I could hear the threats and cries of my own. Closing my eyes, I prepared myself for the collapse. Baychimo. Howling like the souls of the damned, the wind whipped up the tundra as my team and I pushed on. The snow was hard and creaking under my boots, and snow stretched as far as the eyes could see. We were on a mission sponsored by the government of Alaska to search for the Baychimo, more infamously known as the ghost ship of the Arctic. I glanced at the GPS device and saw that we were near the coordinates of the last location of the ship. Even with my parka, the cold was biting, and the feeling of loneliness was palpable. The stories of the Baychimo had fascinated me since childhood, and now, after years, I found myself standing before a dream and a nightmare. "There!" cried one of my team members, pointing forward. Amid the snowstorm, the outline of a large, ominous object gradually came into sight. As we approached the vessel, the outline of the Baychimo could be distinguished. Once a majestic ship, she had become a wreck frozen in ice. The ship was still lying there, half sunk in the ice, a spectral vessel of her haunting journey. "Stay close," I said to my team, covering my mouth with a scarf. We moved towards the ship slowly, the cracking of the ice beneath our feet making the situation all the more eerie. I stretched out a hand and touched the smooth surface of the hull, a thrill running down my spine. The ship seemed to come alive, as if it was waiting for our arrival. "We must get inside," I said. "Maybe there will be traces of what happened to her." The team noticed a gap in the side of the hull and were able to crawl through it. The inside was wet and dark, with only the sound of water dripping and a pungent smell of rusting metal. With our flashlights opened, we noticed how empty the ship seemed to be in the darkness. It was still night, though the snow that blanketed everything was slightly frozen. We separated to work, each of us walking silently through the corridors, the floor covered by a layer of frost. I went to the captain's cabin to search for logs or charts, which I presumed could provide a clue as to what was going on. As I opened the door, I sensed a different type of coldness that was not necessarily connected with the weather. Cabin arrangements were peculiar in the extreme, and it seemed that even time stood still when the crew deserted the ship. A large ledger was placed on the desk, not as worn out as the first one, and the pages were brittle, but not torn. I stretched out my hand to grab the book, but I never got close to the cover as a low voice resounded in the room. "Help us." I froze, my heart beating loudly in my chest. Gaining all my courage, I turned, but there was no one in the room. The whisper echoed again, only this time it sounded a lot more forceful. "Help us." I snatched the logbook, but an airy figure rushed towards me, screaming. I stopped breathing. Dashing out, I met the group panting, and I spoke. "We need to get out of here, right now." Before we had the chance to act, there was an enormous groan, and the floor of the ship shook as if millions of people were running towards us. Panic set in as the whispering got louder, creating horrifying, eerie voices all over the ship. "There is no escape," cried someone in the group, and no one dared to respond. How could we fight an unseen power? I flipped through the logbook desperately, my mind racing. The final entry caught my eye, some gibberish words signed by a noble, probably some captain. As the voices reached a higher pitch, we huddled together, our breath visible in the frigid air. I knew we were trapped, but I refused to give up hope. There had to be a way to break the curse, to escape the fate that had claimed so many before us. With trembling hands, I turned the pages, searching for answers. The whispers swirled around us, and the ship seemed to close in, as if the Baychimo herself was alive, a malevolent force determined to keep us forever. And then, in the silence, between the whispers, a new sound emerged. The departure sound of the ship, the voice of the horn rising. Before I could move to leave, I turned to find myself all alone. In the distance, my screams were the only voice heard. The next day, news articles published headlines about how I took my own life in mysterious circumstances, and my team showed their ignorance regarding the matters on hand. One of them said, and I quote, "We were supposed to go on a trial, but he never showed up."